I'm Gary Locke, Secretary of Commerce, and Christina Romer. Dr. Christina Romer is the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. We've got a large group of people here. We've got limited time. We need your ideas. So what we're going to do is we're going to quickly go around the table so everyone can identify themselves. No speeches, name, organization or company, what it does, because not everybody knows from the name of the organization what you're doing, and that's it. And then we've got a series of questions that we're going to jump in. All right, so let's start over here.
I'm Byron O'Geist. I'm a director with McKinsey & Company, which is a management consulting firm, and I lead our practices in education and economic development.
Great.
I'm Dave Bain, Mayor of Detroit.
Don Peoples of Peoples Corporation, real estate developers and investors in Florida, Nevada, Washington, D.C., and New York.
Raul Valdez, I'm executive chairman of Vivissimo, a software company in Pittsburgh, makes search engine software for companies.
Aparna Mathur, American Enterprise Institute. Aparna Mathur, American Enterprise Institute. We're a think tank in D.C. working on economics and trade.
Julius Janikowski, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission.
I'm Alan Blinder of Princeton University.
I'm Debbie Lee, chairman and CEO of BT Networks, which is network targeted at African Americans. We're also a division of Viacom, which also owns MTV Networks and Paramount Studios.
Antonio Perez, Chairman, CEO of Eastman Kodak. We do consumer imaging products as well as commercial imaging products.
Glenn Hutchins, Silver Lake. We own 14 large technology companies, $80 billion in revenue, 270,000 employees all around the world.
Bill Bynum, I'm CEO of Enterprise Corporation of Delta and Hope Community Credit Union. We're a community development bank based in Jackson, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Memphis is our service area.
Fred Lampropoulos, Chairman and CEO of Merit Medical in Salt Lake City, Utah. We manufacture interventional devices for angioplasty and other types of non-invasive procedures.
I'm Anna Berger, I'm Chair of the Change Event Labor Federation.
Larry Michelle, President of the Economic Policy Institute, a Washington-based think tank.
I'm David Jones. I'm Chairman and Managing Director of Chrysalis Ventures, a Louisville, Kentucky-based early-stage venture firm focused on healthcare and technology, and specifically efficiency and productivity enhancement.
I'm Rich Trumpka, President of the AFL-CIO.
John Wilhelm, President of Unite here, the Hospitality Workers Union.
I think we have some of our invited guests from who are around the table. We also have a lot of staff. So why don't the non-staff folks introduce themselves, because I think we ran out a little bit of space here.
I'm John Eagleton, the CEO of North Star Aerospace in Duluth, Minnesota. We're a precision machining and manufacturing company. Focuses in general aviation parts and airplane seats.
I'm Christy. I'm the president of Future Inc. We're a web design and internet marketing firm in San Diego.
Anybody over there in this corner? Yeah.
Bill McComb, CEO, Liz Claiborne.
Peter Solemson, member of the managing board of Siemens and head of our U.S. operation.
I'm David Brennan. I'm the CEO of AstraZeneca, it's a pharmaceutical company, and I'm also chairing the board of our Pharmaceutical Trade Association for all the research-based pharmaceutical companies this year.
I'm Jim Whitehurst. I'm President and CEO of Red Hat. We're about $1 billion maker of Linux and the leading supplier of open source software.
I'm Jim O'Brien, Chairman and CEO of Ashton Inc. We provide water treatment chemicals and cellulosic acids.
I'm Rob Shapiro, the Chairman of Sonicon, an economic advisory firm, and Chairman of the Globalization Initiative of NDN, a think tank.
I'm Surya Mahapatra, I'm the Chairman and CEO of Quest Diagnostics, and we do 500,000 people tests every night.
I'm David Standall. I'm actually a management consultant, but I founded something called Princeton Job Creation Forum just after Labor Day. Our mission is to put good ideas in Princeton together with money and start business formation at a faster rate.
Roger Rose, I lead the Kessler Foundation. We're the largest private funder of spinal cord injury research and traumatic brain injuries. In addition, we fund startup businesses that create jobs for people with disabilities.
I'm Jared Bernstein, the Vice President of Chicago.
Great. Let me just make a few opening comments and turn over to Dr. Romer, but we're really excited that all of you have been able to take time out of your very busy schedules and travel great distances to be here. We know that you're very successful in your various enterprises and organizations, and so we don't expect you to be wallflowers, and so we'd like to hear your ideas over the next hour that we have. Our country has a job creation problem, and it's calling for very bold but very creative solutions. We've already heard from the Vice President and the President in terms of what the Recovery Act has done, so we're not going to focus on that. But clearly it was a big challenge, and I think we have, the administration has brought us back from the brink of an abysmal economic prospect and what my dad would call the Second Great Depression, depression that he lived through. We've avoided that. But certainly we have a lot more work to do, and 10.2% unemployment is of dire consequences to those who are out of work, and we also know there are a lot of people who are not working as long or as much as they would like to. The administration is working on a whole host of fronts, from expanding exports to helping jumpstart promising new industries like clean energy. SBA has gotten more loan programs with higher guaranteed loans, and the Treasury is working to increase access to capital. We're working on regulatory, fiscal, and physical infrastructure that American businesses need to succeed and to create jobs. But quite frankly, we're going to need help from the private sector and non-governmental sectors, nonprofit sectors, and so that's why you're all here. The private sector businesses are the ones that will create the new innovations, the new business models, and be at the forefront of new industries. So what we want to hear is today is what can be done to hasten job creation or job growth, especially within the private sector. And we hope that we can get your ideas to attack this issue from every angle. And we look forward to your discussion. So I'll turn it over to Christy.
Great. Well, again, let me add my welcome and thanks to everyone for dropping things and coming here to work with us. As Gary said, I think, and actually as the Vice President said, I can't tell you the number of times I've been in the Oval Office and I think I'm giving the President some good news about GDP or consumer confidence, and it always comes down to, yes, but tell me about jobs. And so that has been very much his focus and our focus from day one. And this is a part of that process. The sense, as Gary put it, that for all that we've done and for all the progress that we've made, we do still have a jobs crisis. And just to put a number on it, I think the Council of Economic Advisors would say we're probably about 9 million jobs below where we ought to be. Right? And that is a tremendous deficit and certainly a source of great pain to the country. And I was very struck with that. I loved the President's line, we're committed to doing every responsible thing we can to get people back to work. And so that is what we are asking you to help us think about today. And one of the things I've learned from previous summits like this is whatever the stated topic, it's really whatever you all want to talk about. So we're supposed to be talking about what we can do to encourage investment, competitiveness, job creation. But if you have ideas on export promotion, on infrastructure, we want to hear it all, and that's certainly the way these things go. Don't be surprised. We have a note taker in the room. Obviously, we're a live web feed, but Jesse will actually be running out about 10 minutes before the end to tell the President what you all said. So just know that your words are making a difference. Ridiculously, I'll be running out 10 minutes before 2 because they decided it was important for me to be on MSNBC at 3:30. So and I will also tell them what you said. So just know that you're going to get lots of play. Just a few housekeeping things. I think Avra already told you to try to keep papers and things away from the microphone so that everybody on the web feed can hear. You're supposed to speak loudly. We've already stated your name and company, but if you do it again, that would be fantastic. And so I think, unless there are any questions, let's just get right down to work. And actually, since I was on the phone with Alan Blinder yesterday, I said, Alan, can I get you to make sure that you'll start us off? So I think let's just, again, I think the big questions that I have, one certainly for the business people in the room, for the labor people in the room, sort of, why aren't businesses hiring? As we're getting to the point where GDP is growing, what is it that's holding things back? And very much the President's emphasis is on what could government do, not to take the place of business, not to be the source of demand, but to help businesses start growing again, hiring again. And that's really our view. So, Alan.
And if we could try and keep our remarks as brief and concise, as right to the point as possible, because we have so many people here, we'd like to make sure that everybody has an opportunity.
I will do that. Two premises, both of which we heard from both the Vice President and the President inside. First of all, we should realize that it's late in the game now. This is not the beginning. It's not an exaggeration to call this a job market emergency. And we have to be thinking of things that act fast. That's the first premise. Second premise is that the huge budget deficit is hamstringing us a bit. And that principally means we have to be focused on things that have very large bang for the buck. Just to put that into perspective, if you just look at the total GDP and the total number of jobs and divide them, GDP per job is $110,000 ballpark. We cannot afford to think about $110,000 a job programs. So I'm going to mention two that I've written about that I think are more like $30,000, $40,000 job programs, just ballpark, and of course they can go up or down from that. I've written on both of these, and I'll admit right off the bat that they both have warts. Neither of these is a perfect solution. The first is very obvious, is you put people on the public payroll, as Franklin Roosevelt did, public service employment. I would concentrate it on low-wage jobs. That's how you get 30,000 a job, not 80,000 a job. And there are lots of things to do. Governors and mayors can come up with a long, long list of parks, streets, teachers' aides, and so on. I mention those because realistically, most of these are going to wind up being state and local jobs. Contrary to the widely spread myth, we have a small federal government. Federal civilian employment is just not that large. So even a gigantic increase in federal civilian employment is not that many jobs. State and local employment is a lot more. The second is, so those would be jobs in the public sector. The second would be in the private sector to encourage more job creation by what's variously called the new jobs tax credit, or goes under other names. I would also tilt that one, by the way. There are lots of design features towards low-wage jobs for exactly the same reason as I said before. The advantage of this is that they're in the private sector where these jobs might actually stay. With the public sector, jobs are going to go. They're going to be temporary. The disadvantage is that there's a lot of room for gaming, and so the lawyers that write the legislation have got to write a lot of rules, and then the regulators who write the rules, to try to stamp out as much of this gaming as possible. You will never get it to zero. That's not a reasonable criterion. We wouldn't have an internal revenue code if we insisted on that criterion. We wouldn't have any laws at all, actually. But that's an important consideration in design. And I guess if I had a magic wand and I could make the Congress do what I said, which of course I don't, nobody does, I would say, why not do both? You could think of something in the order of 1 million on the public service jobs and something in the order of 1 million stimulated through a jobs tax credit. That would be 2 million jobs. It's not 9, but nobody's going to have a solution for 9.
All right, thank you. Maybe actually, what I'd love is, as much as possible, to actually have some back and forth. So, do you have some thoughts on those, or
about
different?
three ideas.
Could you also, again, identify yourself for the webcast and for those listening in?
Fred Lampropoulos, Mayor of Medical in Salt Lake City. We created 250 jobs so far this year. We have 1,900 total employees, so I think that's pretty respectable in this market climate. 3 ideas. 1, I think we should make the investment or the research and development tax credit permanent, or at least over a 5-year period. Jobs is all about confidence, and every year we sit around with CFOs and stuff and we talk about what's going to go on, and is this going to get attached to a bill, is it going to get passed, and we take those R&D tax credits and we hire people. We could create confidence by simply saying, instead of once a year or attaching the bill, let's do it for 5 years. We know what we can spend, we know how to invest that. Secondly, I was with a company yesterday. They're a venture-backed company. They put $55 million into the company. They're going to go out of business in about 30 days. As I thought about that, they want me to take over their sales force. They have a great product. They just don't have any more money to operate with. I thought, wouldn't it be a great idea if somehow there was an incentive for us to absorb some of the either in a jobs credit or some way in which we were incentivized to offset some of the risk that we might take to invest in that company. They'll have all their tax losses, but I don't get any of those because I'm not going to buy the company. But there's got to be a method and some mechanics there to incent us to go out and take the risk and hire 30 or 40 employees that we could do immediately. And then last, we have a factory in Ireland, and we have 300 employees there because it's the gateway to our business that we do in Europe, which is about a third of our business. In that area, when we have new ideas, the Irish government will partner with us, and they will, if we will invest a certain amount of capital dollars and create and commit to a certain amount of jobs, they will expend research and development dollars as we invest. So they're not putting the money first, we're putting it in, and as that project comes along, they approve it, they have to approve it first. We spend almost as much money there as we do in the United States because it incentivizes us to do so. So those are the three ideas that are practical, that I deal with every day, and as a CEO, allow me to make decisions on where I'm going to get the best return on my capital.
Go ahead.
I'm Anna Berger from Change to Win, and I just wanted to jump into a couple of different things. One, the first question was, why aren't small businesses hired for people back to work? And part of it is that they don't have access to capital. And even though we did a huge bailout to the financial industry, through TARP and through trillions of dollars, that there's too much, they're holding on to too much of the money and not making it available to small businesses. And as a result of that, some people are losing their job, some people are not being able to expand. And we see that every day where some of our members are losing their jobs because of good businesses that are having a hard time. I totally agree that we need people to work fast, and also with the idea of a long-term solution too, because it does give businesses the understanding that they have to invest in the long term. So if we really want to package this, I think that we need to have a jobs program, a public service jobs program. And I think if you follow the recent report of a Women's Nation where the majority of all primary and co-breadwinners are now women, the whole issue of home care, child care, giving women workers the access to the services they need to be able to take care of their families and work are good ways of being able to put people into jobs quickly where it's really needed. There are other community jobs about parks and infrastructure that need to be done quickly too. Secondly, we really do need to figure out investment in weatherization, retrofitting, not only retrofitting homes, but commercial public buildings as well, because you can, again, bring people into the workforce quickly, and we have great union training programs where people can get the skills that they need, be able to go into the retrofitting and the weatherization of home programs now, get additional skills to be able to do the higher level public and commercial properties as well, and invest in renewables so that we actually have something long-term understanding that we need to have a country that's sustainable through better energy policies. And then if we really think about infrastructure, both the work that we need to do now, that can be short-term jobs about fixing up our schools and our other public buildings, but actually have an industrial strategy that talks about what we need to do in terms of electric grid, bridges, road systems, water systems, the other kinds of mechanisms that we need, high-speed rail. It would give us the understanding of where we're trying to get to at the other end, so that businesses, whether it's steel or others, could be investing in what they need to do now to get ready for the end. I think that if we did all of those things, not just one at a time, really package them together, we could be moving towards 90 million people who need to get jobs. At the same time as having a safety net that keeps people working, keeps people feeding their families and surviving in the meantime.
Oh, can I actually just chime in here, because I think one of the small business credit is absolutely one that the president feels very strongly about, and has been, the work that we did with getting more capital into small banks, that was one step in this, but it's certainly something that we're absolutely committed to. I was just wondering, could we just get any feedback? So when people talk about public sector employment, the speed at which it could happen, right? So do we actually think you could ramp something up in the kind of time frame that is plausible?
Absolutely. A lot of the jobs that we've been talking about are jobs that need a little bit of training, but not long-term training, and that there's a need now. We know that there are long lists already for child care, there are long lists for home care, there are long lists for different kinds of work like that. And we also know that in the public sector, cities and towns have had a hard time having the resources that they need to do things like parks, cities, and other parts of the infrastructure in their cities. So I think that they actually can get to.
Well, actually, let's hear from Mayor Bing. Your thoughts about, could you ramp up a public works program quickly?
Sure, and I want to be parochial for a minute because of what's happening in Detroit. When I hear 10.2% unemployment nationally, Michigan is 15%, Detroit is 30% reported, but in reality, it's probably close to 50%. So we've got projects that are shovel ready. Our problem takes way too long to get the money from the state coming down to local governments. But we've got a project from a water standpoint, for example, where our water system controlled by Detroit represents about a 30-mile radius with communities around us. And if we don't maintain it, if we don't invest and put some new technology in there, not only will Detroit go down, all of those other surrounding communities could very well go down. We're on an international border where there's a bridge project that they're talking about right now that could create somewhere between 10,000 direct jobs. We need to get the money to us on a direct basis as quick as we possibly can, and I think other cities feel the same way, so that really needs to happen.
I would just, back to your question of why companies aren't hiring, I'm Debbie Lee with BT Network, but from what I see from a big company perspective is a lot of large companies had so many layoffs third and fourth quarter last year that companies are really kind of skittish about staffing back up, and they've learned how to do more with less. And unless the government incents them to start hiring again, people are going to stay at status quo until there's some assurance that the economy is coming back. Even though fourth quarter has been much better, it's not an indicator yet that next year is going to be better. So, one of the areas I would focus on is tax incentives for companies to hire employees over the living wage, $65,000. Also tax credits for capital investment strategies and projects over $20 million. I think that would incent companies to become active again and start investing and start hiring. We do a lot of production in Georgia because they have something called the Georgia Entertainment Industry Investment Act, which gives you a 20% tax credit. So we are producing like 8 shows in Atlanta now because it saves us money. And Atlanta and Georgia are really giving LA and New York a run for their money. So those kind of tax credits are really working in the entertainment industry, and I think can be taken to other segments of it.
So, yeah, can we follow up on that for a minute? Because, there is this debate of whether firms are waiting to see, is the demand there? You describe them as skittish. And there's one school of thought that therefore they won't respond at all to an incentive. And what I'm hearing from you is that actually, or one of the things we know, a lot of businesses are expanding, but they're still skittish.
Yes.
So is that the sense that, say, your firm would respond?
Yes, if it helps you, going into 2010 in your budget in terms of saving money in some areas, that would incent companies to spend in other areas.
But going back to Alan's point that it should be lower wage type jobs, if the job is 100,000, 150,000, including benefits and all those extra costs, would a $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 tax credit per job move the needle in terms of hiring?
No, it would have to be higher than that.
Yeah.
But
Not even close.
if we could save 20% on certain projects, we would start with the lower level. But in our industry, it's 65 is pretty much the mean. We don't have a lot of lower wage salaries. I guess that's a good thing. And another way to do it is really to do grants and invest more in the arts and other areas that we have focused on. And then of course education is so important in focusing on that.
Richard caught my eye a minute ago. So
we don't think that business will create jobs unless two things are present. The prospect of sustained consumer demand and access to credit. And right now, neither one of those are present, and so investment is continuing to fall for the third quarter. It drug us about 0.5% off of GDP. So in that kind of circumstance, we really think that immediate government action is necessary to create the demand as a prerequisite to job creation. And we would suggest 5 things. And I want to comment on one thing Alan said as part of it. The first thing is the unemployment benefits are going to expire December 31st. We have over 5 million people who will lose benefits on December 31st. They'll stop spending. There'll be an immediate cutback in demand. We think those food assistance and healthcare, COBRA healthcare, need to be extended. The second thing is to invest in America's infrastructure, of course, with American-made products. because then you're really stimulating the economy. Take a windmill, for instance. If you spend $1 of investment money on a windmill and you buy it from China, 62 cents of the dollar of our money stimulates their economy, not ours. We would also accelerate the shift towards renewable clean energy. The third thing is we really think there has to be aid to state and local governments, and it has to be done quickly. We have a $178 billion deficit. If they stop spending, there'll be hundreds of thousands of layoffs. We have to stop that. Fourth is we agree with Alan about the job creation, targeted job creation, but we really believe it should be not a substitute for permanent jobs. The last time we had one of these programs, permanent jobs went away and we created some low-wage temporary jobs. It didn't do us any good to take away a $15 job and create a $5 job or $10 worth of demand worse off. The last thing is to deal with the credit issue. We think we should take the TARP money, both what's not deployed and what's been paid back, go through community banks, have the community banks sort of like in the PPIP way, have them lend immediately to small and mid-sized businesses and manufacturers with first dollar or first credit, first amount of credit or risk going to the banks and loan at commercial rates. We think that'll get money to the small businesses and medium-sized businesses very, very quickly, start to create the demand so that they can go forward. And I'll just I'll close with this last sentence. When I was president of the United Mine Workers, every time I went to a convention and asked for a dues increase, if I asked for 25 cents or $5, I got the same amount of grief. I never asked for 25 cents. I always asked for the $5 because I was going to get the same amount of grief. Do enough to get the job done, not to try to avoid some criticism about the deficit, because you can afford. I couldn't pay cash for a $100,000 house, but I bought a $100,000 house over 20 years, and we can do that. That's what's needed to get the economy started.
We have a comment back
To
there.
your question about job creation, I'm with Siemens. We have 430,000 employees worldwide, 65,000 employees here in the United States. There are places where we're cutting and there are places where we're adding. We just finished a new factory in Kansas. We're expanding our rail plant in Sacramento. We're expanding our turbine facility in North Carolina. Other places we're cutting. You're right, it's got to be demand. And it's got to be a sense that it's going to be stable government policy. We need a cost on carbon, and we need actual performance on the aspirations that these rail lines are going to get built. We're adding jobs because wind power was subsidized. And we've gotten to the point now where wind power is almost at where other power is, but that took a big subsidy, a big investment, and you're getting a return on investment now. Coal has to go to the same place. We've got the technology for clean coal, but none of our customers can afford to use it.
I would have one of the things Mayor Bean made. I'm sorry, Don Peebles, the Peebles Corporation. We are an entrepreneurial business. We have offices in the western U.S., South Florida, Washington, D.C. We're urban-oriented, and we're in the real estate business, which has been the core of the economic challenge. Mayor Bean mentioned about unemployment in Detroit. Well, here in Washington, D.C., for example, in Ward 8, which is the southeast portion of this city, unemployment is 28%. The federal government is getting ready to, they're going to build the Homeland Security headquarters in Anacostia, in that ward of the city that has that high unemployment. One of the ways that we can stimulate immediate job growth is through targeted economic development, by just based on how the government does business, how the government consumes space and products and services. To one, place government offices in neighborhoods that need economic development and require local municipalities or incentivize them who are receiving federal dollars for various programs to build facilities for them in areas that need economic development in the neighborhoods, such as a Southeast in Washington, D.C., or an Overtown in South Florida. And by simply doing business as a government, we can create economic development. We also need to give incentives, sort of like a super stimulated empowerment zone, to encourage and support broad economic development. And then also the CRA with the lending community. Most of the major banks have major CRA targets, but there's very little transparency in terms of public accountability. the public, the banking public, the borrowing public doesn't know whether the lenders are actively involved. And also, I think there needs to be more accountability there, because the number one problem in the commercial real estate industry is access to capital. We're in marketplaces right now refinancing buildings where they're fully leased to the government, and we're having difficult times getting leverage beyond 55 to 60%, which makes it very difficult. So imagine someone trying to buy a new building or to build one. So something has to be done in terms of encouraging lenders to open up credit and being responsible with their lending. But I believe that the target should be neighborhood economic development in the urban centers, because we need to create jobs, and we need to engage in a partnership with the business community and organized labor for job training to train workers. Because Washington, D.C., and then I'll close, Washington, D.C. had a net growth of 8,500 jobs this year. Yet, here in that ward of the city, it's 28% unemployment, and citywide it's almost 13% because the workers aren't trained to fill these jobs. So that is one of the big challenges.
I want to go over to
Rob Shapiro, IBM and Sonicon. I would urge you to also focus on the long term, that we have a structural problem with job creation. The job creation in the last expansion relative to growth fell by 50% relative to the expansions in the 1990s and the 1980s. So that even when we get growth back, we can find very disappointing job numbers for several more years. And the best answer we have to that, apart from relieving some of the cost pressures on business, much of which comes from healthcare, but apart from that issue, is to reduce the cost for business to create jobs. For example, with initial exemption for the first $3,000 to $5,000 of wages from Social Security taxes for new hires in businesses that are also expanding their total workforce, which could be paid for, I would pay for with a Tobin-type tax, but I'm sure you have lots of ideas about how to pay for it. And to reduce the cost for workers to qualify for new jobs. With initiatives like one that the President supported as a senator, grants to community colleges to keep their computer labs open on the weekends and evenings for any American to walk in, get training on both the internet and computers for free. It's a traditional mission of community colleges, and we still have 30 to 40% of the workforce who are effectively IT illiterate and consequently unable to really qualify for the kinds of jobs that are going to dominate the economy, that already dominate the economy and will totally dominate it within a couple of years.
If I could amplify on that, Jim Whitehurst from Red Hat. We've grown our U.S. workforce by about 40% over the last 2 years. And that's exactly right. On creating an environment that is friendly for innovation. From our perspective, 21st century is an information economy. It's going to be about innovation. It's about skills. It's about funding community colleges to develop the right skills. It's about things like the MIT Open Coursework Project that lets coursework be free to anybody who has access to the internet, which brings up a national broadband policy to make sure all Americans have access to the internet. Net neutrality to make sure that people can get access to that information. Those are the things that are creating an environment for innovation and an architecture of participation that allow companies like us to grow as fast as we have and allow others to grow.
Can I just follow up? So your idea on what you were describing on exempting, new hires from payroll taxes. So are you thinking this a long term? Is it like Allen's sort of a new jobs tax credit, or is sort of like what Larry's EPI is talking about? What are you?
No,
it's a little unclear.
That as the long term. That we need a response to a structural problem of job creation, and so that this is not a matter of this business cycle. That it's intensified by this business cycle, but that once we get past the several humps that we still have in front of us, we're still going to have a job creation problem. What we're experiencing now is enormous job destruction, and that's the focus. But once the rate of job destruction declines, the rate of job creation may very well still be very substantial.
So you're talking about permanent
Yeah.
type of tax incentives.
On a permanent reduction in the cost of creating a new job in firms that are also expanding their workforce, not just creating a new job, but creating a new job when the total workforce is expanding.
we have someone behind us.
Yes, I just wanted to, Christiana Powell with Future Inc., web design and internet marketing. I wanted to make sure that we remain focused not only on businesses that are foundering, but also businesses that are succeeding in this very rough time. If a business is succeeding, these are the innovators, these are people who are making things happen. Most of what we've done so far is helping businesses that are suffering. Some of these tax credit ideas that I've heard talked about, this is great. You know, I mean, as our business has grown 30%, your 5 or 10%, 20% would be better, but your 5 or 10% could be just enough for us to keep adding on to that. So if for successful businesses, that 5 or 10% could be significant, whereas a business that's struggling, well, they're going to need more. So, you know, you're looking at the same, maybe same amount of jobs, but focusing on businesses that are already succeeding.
Actually, maybe I'd go to Larry, who I think had his hand up, since this is all in a little bit the same space here.
Well, I want to feed off of what Alan started us with, and I endorsed some of the ideas he had, but I have a somewhat different overview. I agree we have a jobs emergency. If you have an emergency, you need to do a lot to really address the emergency. So we need solutions at the scale of the problem. I think we can create 4 to 5 million jobs next year if we do the right policies. The mystery as to why businesses aren't creating jobs is not much of a mystery. We had a withdrawal of consumer spending because of a loss of wealth in housing and stocks, et cetera. We have this financial crisis. We have a fall off in demand. So we need to have a lot more demand for goods and services over the next year. To do that, that necessarily means in economic terms, if the government's involved, we're going to have to substantially tolerate a substantially higher deficit in the next year and two. Now, the reason we have a huge deficit now is because we have a huge recession. The way to get out of the deficit is to create jobs, get people working and paying taxes. If we're concerned about the deficits, I think there's legitimate concerns. We can pay for a major jobs initiative that puts a lot of money into the economy over the next 2 years with something like a financial transactions tax. Rob calls it a Tobin tax. Let it start in the 3rd year, and over a 10-year window, it can actually be deficit reducing. So I want to do things at the scale of the problem. Now, some of the things that have to be done at the scale of the problem should involve direct public sector job creation, like Alan said, like Anna said. 2, we can provide relief to state and local governments. We can do infrastructure. We can modernize and rehabilitate a lot of schools next summer. We can do all these things, and if we do enough to expand demand, then in that context, I could see a jobs tax credit that's temporary. That could, if businesses saw a lot of sales opportunities, a tax credit may spur them to hire earlier. But it can only really be if we are substantially increasing their sales opportunities that we then do some kind of credit. At least that's my perspective.
There's no question the 21st century is a knowledge economy, as you said, but it's also a service economy. And the hospitality industry is an often overlooked industry that is of critical importance to the kinds of problems that Mayor Bang and Mr. Peebles are talking about. We have to find a way to put people to work who don't have and are not realistically in the near term going to obtain the kind of advanced skills that are necessary for many of the jobs that have been talked about here. Those are all important, but we got to put people to work who don't have those kinds of skills. The hospitality industry, of course, needs more demand, and that depends in part on consumer demand being restored. And I support for that reason some of the things that Rich Trumka was saying. It depends on the business activity increasing because our industry depends to a large degree on business activity and conventions and trade shows and meetings and that kinds of and that kind of thing. But a lot could be done. I think Mr. Peebles is exactly right with respect to targeting help to particularly high unemployment areas that need it. It would be difficult to identify jobs that are more readily available in a place like the 8th Ward in Washington or in a place like Detroit, and I know a lot about both of those places. It'd be difficult to identify jobs that would be more readily available than jobs in the hospitality industry. And there are ways, even though in the end of the day, like every business, we rely on demand, there are ways to incentivize the creation of those jobs. And then I would also like to say a word about training. The biggest knock on the hospitality industry is that it can be dead-end jobs. But in places like Las Vegas and other places where the major companies in our union have collaborated on training that is real-world training, that enables a housekeeper, for example, to become a cook, or enables a bus person to become a bartender, and to increase her or his income. The hospitality industry is the largest employer of welfare-to-work people in this country. It's the largest. It's among the largest employers of people of color. It's the largest among the largest employer of immigrants. It is among the largest employer of people who don't have a lot of formal education. People can make a good living in our industry. And I was delighted to hear Mr. People say that, and he's done a great job in our industry, say that he thinks labor management partnerships are important. We do too. The hospitality industry is an industry where you can statistically demonstrate that there is an actual difference between union and non-union jobs. I know I'm going to make some people mad here, but that's okay, because we're in a crisis. And so we have a little debate that's good. Union jobs in the hospitality industry are not a drain on the community. They tend to have health care benefits. They tend to have retirement benefits. They unquestionably have much better wages than non-union jobs in the hospitality industry. They are not a drain on the taxpayer. We don't need to create more jobs that are so low paid and so bereft of benefits that the taxpayers end up subsidizing it. Anyway, so we need to find a way, we think it's the Employee Free Choice Act, to make sure that people actually can form unions in industries like the hospitality industry so that the jobs that we create are good jobs. I was so pleased to hear the Vice President say that if we're going to create jobs, they got to be good jobs. What is the use of creating jobs that are not, at the end of the day, jobs that support families and communities and have benefits associated with it? It makes no sense. Unionization is not the only way to do that, but in the hospitality industry, it is the primary way to do that. And on the training issue, there's an enormous amount of wasted training money, if we're honest about it, in this country. Enormous amount, because training is not sufficiently grounded most of the time, or I shouldn't say that, a lot of the time, it's not sufficiently grounded in what employers actually need and what employers and unions know how to do when they do it together. And I would love to have every single person in this room come to the Labor Management Training Center in the hospitality industry in Las Vegas, which even in a time when the economy in Las Vegas is in tough shape, is training people to improve their skills and improve their lives.
Glenn, you've been having your hand up for quite a while. Identify yourself.
Glenn Hutchins, Silver Lake. I'm also on the board of Brookings with John, and we convened a group of CEOs at Brookings for 2 days last week to talk about this issue. We're going to issue a report either this week or next, and I'll just give you the headlines. One is the major issue is uncertainty. We talked about that. There are things government, by the way, the way I think about this is what can be done quickly at little to no cost. Right. One is steps to alleviate uncertainty. There are two key places you can do this. One is that people have a great fear of a double dip, and making sure that people understand there are robust policy tools which we intend to use to prevent the economy from going down again. Just the way, thank you very much, you've done it over the course of the past year. Make it clear you're not going to let it go down again. We'll create some degree of certainty. Second, you have to understand, you have to make choices. I'm not being critical, but it's very important, it's almost impossible for businesses to understand what their costs of health care are going to be, what their costs of energy are going to be, what their taxes are going to be, what labor policy is going to be, and so on, because there's a massive legislative agenda that creates a huge amount of uncertainty and causes people to be very cautious. And creating some sort of framework within which people can understand what those costs are going to be and what the timing around that's going to be would be extraordinarily useful. It's kind of point one. Point two is with respect to hiring people to low end of the labor force, we're going to say that we think that there should be underemployment insurance. Again, that doesn't cost you anything. So if you're, rather than laying off people in your job, having job sharing inside some of these organizations and then having the amount of money that would be spent on unemployment be used to supplement the wages so people can stay in their jobs until those jobs come back. So another thing which John and I disagree on a little bit, but it's in the report, which is kind of what we call a training wage, being able to allow people to hire at the very low end of the scale, into, for instance, retail jobs, and take the cost of training into as credits against the minimum wage so that they can create employability for those people. Small businesses. Issues are credit and opportunity exports. In the new credit card bill, the credit card industry believes that will cause a significant diminution because of the loss of risk-based pricing. caused a significant diminution of credit to small businesses, and we believe you should allow small businesses to opt out of the prohibition on risk-based pricing and actually pay a little bit more to get credit, which they otherwise won't be able to get because the credit card companies will not afford it to them. Credit cards is by far the largest source of financing for small businesses. Also, with export markets growing disproportionately, we believe that the various government agencies, the SBA, the Ex-Im Bank, and the U.S. Special Trade Representative can do a lot to help small businesses access the export markets. Big businesses, there's a massive amount of cash trapped outside the United States, in excess of $100 billion. You know all about this. And it's not going to come back in. You're not going to get the tax revenue on it. And if you create tax holidays for that money to come in to invest in plant and equipment and jobs, you will have a free way of stimulating employment in the United States. Finally, I think Rob, who I learned a lot of this from, is absolutely right. We know what to do to create jobs in the long term. We just have institutional and political, cultural impediments to getting it done. And it's actually very simple. And we need a new set of institutional arrangements, which I talked to Gary about this morning, to create a long-term planning function inside this country, which all of our competitor countries have. Because we're in a long-term global competition for jobs. Those guys are way ahead of us. They're much better organized. They have plans. They have resources. They got smart people doing it, and they're working every day to get our jobs away from us. And we're not doing it because we're stuck in an election cycle.
All right.
So I'm done.
All right, thank you.
Okay, David Jones from Chrysalis Ventures, and I've got 2 points. There's lots of focus, lots of smart comments about the lack of credit. That's vital. The lack of equity is also vital. The venture capital industry has been a huge engine of growth. There are 12 million jobs in the economy today. There are 11,000 openings today. Don't forget about that. And, you know, we're losing our innovation edge in a big way. There are a lot more IPOs registered right now in Asia than there are in the United States. Only 17 today, and that's actually up dramatically. But back to the question of why won't business hire, I'd like to put it in plain English, and I apologize for being sort of the skunk at the table, but a significant portion of our workforce is not fit to work. The administration is all over the education issue. I applaud it, and I won't go there, but if you look at the Army's own data, only 25% of 17 to 24-year-olds are fit for enlistment in the Army. 25%. Education's the first reason. Obesity is the second reason. So keep after the administration's education goals. There's nothing more important. But we need not only a clean tech revolution, we need a lean tech revolution. We've got to get after the condition of the population, because for many positions, if you have your choice of hiring Chinese or Vietnamese or pick your, you know, up and coming hungry country, you're going to pick them rather than our workforce. Absenteeism, you know, sickness, all of the costs that are associated with that. And that's what we got to get to after we fix insurance.
Right, so actually, I think it ties in with insurance, because you certainly know that a big part of what
But it's not a doctor and hospital issue. There's communications technologies. There's a lot of peer-to-peer, cultural, food policy stuff. It's not just institutional.
No, but certainly, you know, a focus on prevention is a big part of things, and I've been enough with the First Lady who's made childhood obesity her #1 issue. Right. I think there was someone behind us who wanted to.
John Eagleton, North Star Aerospace. We're a small manufacturing company. And to follow up on what Mr. Hutchins said over there, when I was invited to join this group, not having the wide scope of activities that many here in the room do, I joined a town hall meeting of our business leaders, bankers, educators, manufacturing, government, and talked about the issue. And while capital availability is important, there's one major thing having to do to come up from the banks. Understand there's a new tax being levied against the banks for the FDIC, shoring up the FDIC. It's going to take $58 billion out of loaning of the banks, and I only know that from the bankers, but it's an interesting. You know, my company will start hiring and creating jobs when we have more demand and more orders. And the consensus of our community was uncertainty and lack of confidence in all of the projects that Mr. Hutchins listed. And they felt that all of those projects were creating the citizens to feel they really didn't know what tomorrow held for them, with unemployment, with the war, with the recession, the lack of COBRA expiring, all the things that affect citizens. They just aren't eager to start buying. So from Main Street, if you will, small community, I'm the messenger, and uncertainty, lack of confidence has got to be considered.
Appreciate that, John. Well, but you know, the Congress is debating health care, and soon they'll be taking up energy and financial regulatory reform. I mean, obviously, the sooner they enact that, whatever the version is, that would create the certainty, the predictability, so that many of you could operate. And obviously, I know the administration would like to have those things pass as quickly as possible, too.
Let's go down to the end of the table.
Aparna Mathur, American Enterprise Institute. I think we were talking about global competition earlier, and I think one thing that's most striking in that area and where the US is probably the least competitive is the US corporate tax rate. And we've been doing a lot of research at AEI on the topic. And so currently the US corporate tax rate is almost 10 percentage points higher than the average of all OECD economies. And we can't afford to leave it at that level and not have anything done, particularly in the times that we're facing today. I know that there's a large economics literature looking at the effect of corporate taxes on investment. Studies find that the higher the corporate tax rate, the lower the level of investment that happens in those countries. And in research that we've done at AEI, we find that that translates into effects on labor as well. You see less job creation, you see less, lower wages for workers. I think, one way of achieving sort of multiple objectives is, cut the corporate tax rate. You will see not only higher domestic investment, but also foreign firms more readily, investing in the U.S., which would lead to higher job creation and higher worker wages. And we were talking about Ireland, and I think a big reason why you see a lot of companies investing in Ireland is the corporate tax rate structure. So I think if we address that, you would see a big boost at this time.
Before we move on, I think one important issue, of course, is the stated corporate tax rate is obviously one, that's one number, but one of the things we know about differences across countries is in a country like the United States, there are lots of exemptions and special things that if you were actually doing a careful comparison, you'd have to take those into.
We did it for the effective rates too, and we do find that we're still, pretty much to the right.
That is certainly the important thing. Yeah, over here.
I'm Jim O'Brien with Ashland. One of the things that the administration did a great job coming in was getting liquidity in the system, the banking system. Then we got off the track with demonizing the people in the banking system and all that with that, because we did have some evil person to do this to. So we found those people. We need to get back on track again and keep working on liquidity and getting the money going. And one of the things that we have a proposal to make 441,000 jobs within the broader chemical industry. Inside our industry, along with Abercrombie & Fitch, Texas Instruments, and Family Dollar Stores, Dow Corning, we have a thing called student loan auction rate securities. $26 billion of money is frozen on our balance sheets that we can't use. And I've laid off about 125,000 people this year because I can't get money from the bank. The money's frozen on my balance sheet. And I have projects that I would like to do. But if we could free up this $26 billion is sitting there doing nothing, and these are government securities which are guaranteed by the Department of Education, that we can just say, let's create a liquidity event for that. That could be as soon as $63 billion by just freeing up that $26 billion. And this is cash that's totally unproductive on a corporate America that wants to be put to work. We don't have to go to the banks. We don't have to go anywhere for it. We just have to be liquidized in this and bring the money forward. And I think it's something that the government can do easily if they choose to do so. But the thing is we can't do is say put us all on the TARP list and say we're going to all have to be scrutinized for our CEO pay and anything else for the penalty for doing that. We were in a market that was being exchanged daily that froze. This unfreezes. Let's get this money back to work again. And this is not money that has to be created by the banks. It's sitting there doing nothing.
Yeah, Bill McComb with Liz Claiborne. I would just make a
couple comments to amplify what you're hearing from almost everybody. Although, having spent a year lobbying heavily for the NOL tax carryback, which a version of was just approved, I can say I was shocked at the degree of lack of knowledge here in Washington around the reality around liquidity. And the fact of, outside of the very, very big corporations, I mean, have a multi-billion-dollar company, but we were absolutely put on credit freeze by our banks. And anything that could expand our payroll, we were forced to do the opposite by the banks. The NOL tax carryback, we paid $1.5 billion in taxes over the previous 5 years. This is a year where we're going to lose a lot of money. We've restructured our business a lot. The perfect example of something that has taken us from preparing to close 10 more stores to opening 25 in 2010. But there's bonus depreciation. There are areas in the tax code that would very quickly and efficiently reward companies for investment-related activity. I think you're part of the opening challenge you had where you said you're looking for 1 or 2 that are huge. It's going to take 3 or 4 or 5 that are medium to small to start piling back up. But I can tell you, the example on the NOL, and by the way, $30 billion of liquidity got cut when they came in the 11th hour and trimmed the size of that back by pinpointing it to 08 or 09. If they did 08 and 09, the measure of liquidity that would flow back to healthy companies that had a good business model, and for 1 year or 2 years doesn't. That should be looked at. But I would look at bonus depreciation. I think the conversation around payroll tax exemption for a period of 2 years for new employees, and it would need to be net new employees, because we're all in a position where we're downscaling some parts of our business, the sunset parts of our business, and upscaling in the sunrise parts of our business. But a rolling 2-year payroll tax credit or exemption for net new employees could be very effective for certain parts of the business. And the last thing that I would point to that you should think about, because it's the next big dirty bubble out there that people don't talk to. I wouldn't be a big recipient of it, but we tend to be sort of in the middle of the discussion. Commercial property. So here we are, we lease a lot of property. We don't own it, we lease it. Stores as an example. The hospitality industry, that's another whole big one. There's no question that it's a great big bubble about to burst, and with it, many, 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 many jobs. So for many of us, we're gun shy about signing new leases because the value of a lease is very undetermined right now. So that's another place to actually apply credits for people that are taking on the risk of occupying property that should be revenue producing, but at levels that aren't very certain, may actually stem the blowing of some very, very big commercial loans. So a couple ideas for you.
That's it.
Benji, I need to run. I just want to say this has been so incredibly helpful. I am just both so honored that you all have been here, and just the quality of discussion, I think, has just been off the charts. So I'm going to leave you in Gary's good hands.
Secretary Locke is dead.
Great.
Christy is doing some press.
David Chandler, Principal Job Creation Forum, and I want to add back to one of Alan's premises, and that is, although it's sort of obvious to everybody, it's not obvious, and that is this decline destroyed a lot of businesses. Just destroyed. So the idea we can have a recovery, things will come back the way they are. A lot of people still carry their heads, and I had an interesting meeting this week in Princeton with some entrepreneurs who are things going, and a lot of people in our area are relatively well educated, working in places like pharma, telecom, financial services, who think they're owed 6-figure salaries and don't know that the world has changed for them and are not yet adapted to it. So the idea of the fit workforce, the low end is true, it's also true at the high end.
That's exactly right.
Just their expectations of reality today. The second thing I would say is the engine of growth for jobs is small business. Carl Schramm, who's here, has done research. 100% of the new jobs created net over the course of the past 2 decades have come from small businesses. He's got research, website is Kaufman.org. You can look it up, Kaufman, while you're here. But without small businesses, we would not have had any job growth over the past 2 decades. Along with that, I guess the piece that I think is critically important is the administration started off, I think, very smartly to get the stimulus bill put together. I sit on the stimulus task force in New Jersey and oversee the spending by the state. And directed some investments toward things that need to be done. But I know from my experience talking to people, they conflate the TARP bailout with the stimulus package. A lot of people walking around the street think the two are the same thing. They don't get the difference. They don't understand the difference. And there's a lot of issues that they have to result in bank intervention. Therefore, the people I'm trying to work with on a voluntary basis, we're trying to get new businesses going based on some of those strategic areas: green technology, improved healthcare technology, improved healthcare delivery. Infrastructure cannot get the first nickel to get their business going. Banks are sitting on their wallets, private equity sitting on their wallets, venture capital sitting on their wallets. So whatever was said to me, people knowing I was coming here, was, can we do something as spectacularly significant for small business and business creation as we have done to the banks? It's very obvious what's been done there. It's not so obvious what's been done on small business side.
Antonio?
Yeah, Antonio Perez from Kodak. I'm going to focus on something that we believe it is sustainable and that is very fast acting. We see this recession with two different phases, at least in the industry where we are. The first phase, the layoffs that happened during the third and the fourth quarter of 2008 were due because the top line went down dramatically, and then everybody went after the SG&A, the sales general administration cost. The layoffs that came later in January, in the first and second quarter, even though the numbers are a lot smaller, are a lot more dangerous than the other ones, because those are projects that have been canceled. And those are the projects that are going to create the economic growth in 2 and 3 years from now. Those are, and this is because those things have happened because then there was this, the unknowns, that were described very well by Glenn. There are a lot of issues why you are uncertain of what's going to happen, how long, all of this new legislation. We have to get those projects back, because those projects, first, they are very high-paid jobs, first of all, because they are R&D jobs, but they have a ripple effect because they influence a sort of industries around. The whole industrial tissue around you gets to be part of those projects as suppliers, small businesses and all that. One way to get those, those projects back, immediately, will be an R&D tax. Now, there has to be a way that this R&D tax can be monetized. There are many companies in this country, because we invest most of our R&D in this country, we are in a taxable loss position. So even if there's an R&D tax, you won't get any benefit immediately. So if you were able to do, an R&D tax that can be applied against FICA or against Medicare or whatever tax you think is easy to apply to, you will get those projects back immediately. Those projects not only hire very high, well-paid jobs in large companies, but they are creating all this other tissue with the other suppliers that have about us. And the second element is, this has to be permanent, or it has to be long-term enough, because these R&D projects are 4 or 5 years. We can't be waiting to see if it's going to be changed, reassigned, and all that.
Let me see. We're trying to get to some people who haven't had a chance to make comments yet. Anybody here?
Right down there.
Okay, right here. Go ahead.
My name is Raul Valdez with Visimo. For context, we're a 100-person software company in Pittsburgh. I'd like to add just a vote to something I've heard before, the job creation tax credit. So we're 100 people. We have an operating plan for this fiscal year. For us, starts October 1st, of growing about 30%. I've read one version of the job creation tax credit, has different numbers than Mr. Blinder mentioned. Talks about $6,000 per job created. Talks about a 15% rebate on the increase in the wage bill. So I'm looking at our company, if we're going to grow by 30 people, starting on a base of 100, if I get a 15% tax rebate, then for the same cost, we can hire 4 or 5 more people. We would do that. So we're a small business. There must be many small businesses that would make the same calculation with the proviso of all the uncertainty. That's actually factor number one, the lack of confidence and uncertainty. I think that would be millions of jobs right there. I'll let the economists sort out whether it's $30,000 per job or $6,000 per job in the version that I saw. I just want to add my vote to that. I think it's an excellent idea, a job creation tax rebate on the increase in the wage bill.
Can I just clarify? I was talking about jobs that pay $30,000. If the subsidy was 20%, it's $6,000. Not to give a $30,000 subsidy for a job.
Yeah, go ahead. You guys are about the same place.
It's the same rate.
Yeah. Byron O'Geist from McKinsey. One on the consumer demand side and creating the demand and the purchasing power, just a thought in terms of the structure of these programs in order to get the money there fast. One program that exists for a long time that's actually putting money into the economy very quickly is the supplemental nutrition assistance, right? The food stamp program. And it works so well because it gives people who need food purchasing power for food immediately. It would work a lot, and they can meet that through many different sources. It wouldn't work as well if it were a program where there was just an agency that distributed food. So if you think about some of the programs, take training, for example. There's an enormous need to retrain people, to train people. What if with unemployment insurance went also a training voucher, that you could spend in a union apprenticeship program, you could spend at a community college, you could spend matched with part-time labor, you could spend at the Cisco Academy to become a IT, but that could be used very rapidly by the person who needed it quickly. And thinking about that, including retrofitting homes, if you just structure these programs so that you could put the purchasing power where it could be used and people could make rapid judgments as to how to get that service, I think some of those programs could be much more effective. And I do think food stamps, very old program, works very efficiently that way. And so thinking about that model for other programs could be powerful.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, a few more. Go ahead. Identify yourself.
Yes, Surya Mahapatra from Quest Diagnostics. We are one of the companies who hired a lot of people last year, almost 6,000 people. And I put 1,000 more job openings, but I can't find the trained people because there's such a shortage of lab techs and lab scientists. So while we are focused on short-term job creation, my request to you that we need to focus on science, math, and technology, or else it's not going to be sustainable. So
Good.
I would like some way putting some emphasis on education.
Yeah.
Fred Lampropoulos, Mayor of Medical. This has been stimulating to talk about all the jobs and public policy issues to bring jobs in the front door. Yesterday I was in New York, and as we all have walked down the streets, we see products on the streets that are counterfeit. But can you imagine what I felt like recently when a medical device with my name on it, with my name on the package and then printed on the entire device, was presented to me that was counterfeit and made in China. Right. So there's some things that we can do to protect our jobs, but we'll need the help of the government to do that and to really clamp down and not to turn their heads on these kinds of issues. The garment industry, the recording industry, the software industry have dealt with it, but can you imagine our devices that are being used, that are being counterfeited and stealing jobs from the United States of America? It needs to be looked at.
Mayor Bing?
I want to compliment the administration on something. You're not getting a lot of compliments, but you've got a job program, your summer youth job program that worked very well for the city of Detroit, where we were able to hire 7,000 kids for the summer, ages 14 to 24. You need to keep that going, because what that did in our community was also lowered our crime rate over the last 4 months also. We've had a major reduction in our crime rate because a lot of those people in that age group were working. We need to keep that going.
Anna?
Just want to make one quick question about training. I think it was an issue raised about the workforce being low skilled, not prepared. The reality is workers in America work really hard every day. Lots of them have 1 or 2 or 3 jobs trying to figure out a way to make ends meet. And they actually need opportunities. And the other reality is that your zip code probably gives you a chance to help more about what the opportunities for the future. If you live in a low income neighborhood, you have less chances for everything. We think there needs to be a lot more training opportunities for workers while they're working so that they can increase their skills. John Moham talked about the Culinary Institute and the culinary workers and their partnership. We have lots of great training programs across this country where we can actually take those programs and expand them. Where we can expand, where we can give more involve our kids in school to work, that we can do expansion of Job Corps, that we can build out on the infrastructure that we have for the 21st century workforce. Whether it's healthcare, whether it's clean jobs, whether it's hospitality, there's a mechanism for doing it, but we really need to, I think, expand it, retool it, and make sure that it can be replicated across this country.
I think we have one last comment in the corner. Yeah.
Healthcare's created a lot of
Dave
jobs.
again.
David Brennan with AstraZeneca. Healthcare's created a lot of jobs over the last decade. And I think, we're now looking at this healthcare bill that's coming through and thinking, do we need to restructure our businesses in some way? We're being asked to pay for half of it. It's going to be $400 billion. It comes out of industry as a contribution toward whatever this is going to be if it passes. And I think that creates a bit of an issue and gets to this issue of unpredictability, and I think we need to get at it. My suggestion would be that there's an opportunity to provide more reward and recognition for innovation, to find a way for tax credits in other ways for companies that are starting to be able to be recognized and rewarded in some way for new innovations, for new intellectual property, for things that make a contribution to the knowledge economy that you mentioned, which I think is what we're headed for in the next decade. Because that's something we need to build toward. I think if we've got a goal to build that kind of economy, then the policies need to be in place to support it.
All right, our time has come to an end. Incredible ideas, and I'm sure that we're going to be following up, several of you, on some of these ideas. Again, your comments are being transcribed and recorded and will be passed on. There'll be a lot of people poring over your comments, trying to synthesize it and matching them up with the comments from the other groups too. And so thank you all for your incredible participation, sacrifice of time and energy and travel. And let me just say that the administration takes this very seriously. Every meeting that I'm in with the president, on the full cabinet, to even small group meetings focusing on domestic policy, the president just keeps harping away at what are we doing to create jobs, to bring down that unemployment rate. And so your views are very, very much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.